We've got something. Okay, it's human. Hello? Take it easy in there. You're safe now. You'll have to forgive the scanning process. We can't take any chances. Dr. Freeman? Gordon Freeman? Is that you? You've made it here this quickly. Well, Eli is going to be amazed, not to mention relieved. I'm Dr. Mossman, Dr. Judith Mossman. I've been hearing about you since long before the Black Mesa incident. Oh, Black Mesa. I do so envy you working with Eli and Dr. Kleiner when they are at the top of their field. Ah, there we go. You can come through now. I'll take you down to Eli right away. He would never forgive me if I kept you waiting. We could certainly use the extra help around here. We've covered a lot of ground in the last few months, but things would go so much faster if we had more people with your training. We're closing in on a reliable local teleport technology. Something the Combine still hasn't mastered. Eli thinks their portals are string-based, similar to our Calabi-Yau model, but they've failed to factor in the dark energy equations. They can tunnel through from their universe, but once they're here, they're dependent on local transportation. If they knew what we were doing with entanglement... Oh. Listen to me. I sound like a postdoc. I'm just so excited to think that we'll finally have the chance to work together. Where was I? Oh, yes. Dr. Kleiner compressed the Zen relay far beyond anything he imagined at Black Mesa. We've figured out how to use Zen as an unexpressed axis, effectively a dimensional slingshot, so we can swing around the border world and come back in local space without having to pass through. Oh, here's Eli now.
All right, good. You keep right on.
Eli, look who I found in the airlock.
Gordon Freeman. Let me get a look at you, man. My God, you haven't changed one iota. How do you do it? Now, let's see. The last time I saw you, I sent you up for help after the resonance cascade. I never thought it would take you this long to get back to me. Welcome to the lab, anyway. It's not Black Mesa, but it served us well enough.
It's going to be a lot more like Black Mesa with Gordon here to help.
Right you are. MIT graduates are few and far between these days. We'll get you out of that hazard suit and back into your lab coat where you belong.
Let me just finish up some work and I'll see what I can dig up. Dr. Freeman, it's been a real honor. I'm looking forward to working together.
Eli's lab. We built Eli's lab after Dr. Kleiner's, which gave us a better understanding of how to set up and design effective choreo scenes. As a result, we were able to create a more complex scenario with more opportunities for it to respond to the player. Having multiple characters doing their own thing around the room made staging tricky, and it took a lot of iteration and playtesting to get it to run smoothly. Our experience showed that, generally, players wanted to play along with the scene. They just needed enough subtle clues to know where we wanted them. Similarly, if they got distracted, the scene had to gently pause and wait for them to return.
Bugs and pickups. Sometimes even little things can be a nightmare to get working. For example, getting a character to hug another character, or even more simply, just to pick up an object from a table, can cause a lot of issues. Even worse, in our dynamic environment, where the characters and objects aren't in preset positions, and the players running around getting in the way, these require a level of synchronization that can be quite tricky. They're made harder because humans handle them without thinking. As you're moving to the table to pick up a cup, you're doing all kinds of preparation with your body to get your feet and hands in the right position to be allowed to do it comfortably, everything ready right when you get there. If you're moving in to hug somebody, you're both doing it at the same time, adjusting constantly based on each other's movement. To get these features to work in the game involved a lot of synchronization work, making characters aware of each other and the world, and at the same time, getting them to know more about their future plans. It's tempting to want to break up pick up a cup example into discrete steps. Walk to the table, face cup, pick up a cup, because it's much simpler that way, and it makes the steps nicely reusable. But that's how robots work, not humans. Our characters had to know they were moving to a table with the intention to pick up a cup, so they could work on multiple parts of it simultaneously, making sure their hand grabs the cup right when they get there. With 2 characters, it's even more of a negotiation. Both need to agree where and when it's going to happen, and everything needs to happen in place in a seamless fashion. While these moments of simple interaction with their characters in the world are often short, they were critical to making them seem like believable people.
Feel free to look around. Balancing the player's desire to explore with the narrative goals of the scene was always a challenge. We wanted the room to be full of interesting things to look at, but many players wouldn't explore until they were sure they wouldn't miss any of the character performances. That's why it was important for Eli to tell the player to look around midway through the scene. It signaled that it was safe to explore. From there, we could trigger a variety of custom mini-scenes based on what caught the player's interest.
I want to put this dense chunk of visual story here because it's the place the game is most explicit at telling players to explore space. Even though its primary job is world building, we still take strides to highlight the relationship between Eli and Breen, giving context to the world's central conflict.
Fine scientist, Judith. She was up for your job at Black Mesa, but you edged her out with your Innsbruck experience.
Oh, Gordon. The Vortigaunt said you were here. I can't believe you made it so quickly on foot.
I believe he broke your record, honey.
Well, he earned it. I guess you proved you can handle yourself out there.
There's nothing Gordon can't handle, with the possible exception of you.
Dad, please.
Take a look at this, Gordon.
Alex, I thought you were on watch.
The Vortigaunts relieved me so I could come see Gordon. Anyway, I should be in here working on the portal.
I have the repairs well in hand. Someone misjudged the capacity of the Combine Thyristor.
Are you blaming me?
No, not at all. It was a calculation error, not a mechanical problem.
Then maybe you should let me do the calculations next time as well as installing it.
Alex, really? Sometimes I think you deliberately misunderstand me.
Alex, why don't you take Gordon along and give him some practice with the gravity gun?
Sure. Come on, Gordon. Let's go have some fun.
The zero-point energy field manipulator is not a toy, Alex.
Ugh, let's get out of here.
See you in a little while, Gordon. Go with Alex, Gordon. She'll look after you.
Mossman. Judith Mossman was originally based on a character we had planned for a section of Half-Life 1. That section was cut from the base game and reused in Uplink, but without the character. We consider her the most complex character in Half-Life 2. We knew we'd be walking a tightrope with how the player felt about her even before Nova Prospekt, because the player's trusted sources don't agree. Eli likes her, but Alex doesn't. We recognized there was a limit to how much complexity we could pull off in relationships, but we felt that a stepmother-daughter dynamic was something players would understand. Whether or not you agree with Mossman, she's doing something heroic. She risks being a double agent to get the information she needs to protect Eli and Alex. She just didn't plan for Gordon.
So I see you've met Dr. Mossman. She's one of the main reasons I spend so much time outside. You should hear her drone on about how it should have been her in the Black Mesa test chamber that day. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be talking behind her back. It just gets a bit claustrophobic down here. That's the old passage to Ravenholm. We don't go there anymore. We used to be able to go right up there to Ravenholm. It was an old mining town inhabited by some escapees from City 17. Believe me, that tunnel is sealed for a reason. So, here we are, the scrapyard.
Character lighting. In the first year of development, we were struggling to get our characters to feel as realistic as we wanted them to. There were actually quite a number of different problems, all of which eventually required specific technological and artistic improvements to fix. The first major problem was lighting. At the time, lighting technology in games had many shortcuts, some due to performance, but many due to misunderstandings of how it all works. To make characters look good at the time, models and textures had to be created with much of their lighting solution baked into them, like shadows and glossiness. The characters looked cool, but they also looked like video game characters. We started building Alex with this approach, because that was how you were supposed to do it. We used the bake solutions and lit her like a movie actor, essentially as if she had a custom lighting rig that followed her around and ensured she always looked good. But it didn't really work. The range of lighting environments and the dynamic nature of video games meant that she'd look great in some environments, but always end up looking terribly unrealistic at some point. We tried iterating on our lighting rig, increasing its capabilities, but eventually it felt like we were at a dead end. Returning to the drawing board, we decided to try a different approach. We built her and the lighting and the textures from the ground up, throwing everything away, focusing on not on what we wanted her to look like in our ideal lighting, but on how things were supposed to work in the real world. It might seem obvious, but it wasn't how it was done, at least not in video games. When looked at outside the game's renderer, these models and textures actually looked worse than the previous versions, but we managed to methodically pull out all the shortcuts and misconceptions about how light and texture and graphics cards worked and put it all back together. After all that was done, when we were finally able to look at Alex in-game with her new models and textures in a dynamic environment that kept her visually consistent at all times, well, she looked great, totally seamless and part of the Half-Life 2 world. Facial technology. We wanted players to care about our characters, and to even have a chance at achieving that, we knew we had to invest a lot of technology for our characters' faces. It's well understood that humans are wired to pay attention to faces, subconsciously reading all kinds of information from them, so it's an extremely high bar, and if we couldn't reach it, we'd probably push players away from our characters, not towards them as we hoped. We started out doing a lot of research. It was not heartening. The best examples we could find weren't anywhere near close to being able to be run in real time, while the best real-time ones weren't close to the quality we wanted. We wanted to look as good as an animated movie, but they often took hours to render frames and were totally linear, authored by up to 100 animators, whereas ours had to be dynamic. A character might be trying to speak dialogue or a facial move derived from a player's actions and created by just a handful of artists. These requirements eventually led us to Dr. Paul Ekman's facial acting coding system, a system for taxonomizing human facial movements done back in the 1970s. It gave us a vocabulary for describing facial movements throughout our tools and code, and a target to aim for when designing our characters' faces. With it as a framework, we started a many-year process of iterating on how we built faces and heads of our characters. Where others had tried taking bits of Ekman's work, we wanted to try to use it all. That meant a lot of time spent figuring out how to do each piece within the tight performance constraints we had. But we also spent a lot of time just looking at people and faces, trying to find the extra features that would add the most value, like skin elasticity, teeth shadowing. In the end, while we weren't able to do everything we wanted, we did manage to get the pieces we thought were the most important to a convincing facial performance level on our characters. Eye shader. Another critical part of getting character faces to be convincing was in the eyes. Humans are great at reading eyes. There's a part of your brain dedicated to it, down to knowing where somebody is looking based on the reflections on the eyeballs. But there are all kinds of subtleties that matter. Eyes aren't actually spheres. Eyelids get distorted by the cornea moving around underneath. Eye movement can increase the odds of blinking. Eyes don't actually line up directly behind the pupil. They're shifted slightly. All these little details might feel small or unnoticeable, but the absence hurts the believability of the character. We worked on eyes for a long time, iterating our eyeball model and feature set little by little. Some things required external interfaces, like what things in the environment were interesting to look at, where others were automatic, at a subconscious level in the AI, like blinking, an obvious requirement, but one that's subtly confusing if it's wrong. Eye reflections had a particularly large impact. They're ultimately a tiny amount of real estate on the screen, but the difference they made was enormous. We knew we were finally done when we reached the point where, with our eye shader off, a character looked like a doll, human-like, but unconvincing in some way that was hard to describe. But when we turned it on, suddenly it felt like a human was looking at us.
Moving the gravity gun. When the gravity gun was first prototyped, we planned to give it to the player midway through the game. But as playtesting progressed, we saw the strength of its design and realized the gravity gun and, more importantly, the ability to launch saw blades at zombie faces needed to come earlier. That meant Eli's lab also needed to move earlier too. It was a significant change, but it was crucial to Half-Life 2's success. It serves as a good reminder that storytelling and gameplay are intertwined, and neither can always take priority. They have to work together.
This is a gravity gun my father was talking about. You can call it the zero-point energy field manipulator if you really want to. It's designed for handling hazardous materials, but we mainly use it for heavy lifting. Give it a try. The primary trigger emits a charge. You can punch stuff and send it flying. I found it handy for clearing minefields. The secondary trigger lets you grab things. You can throw them with the primary. Once you've picked something up, you can drop it gently by pressing your secondary trigger again. Pick up some stuff and toss it. You can also pull stuff over from a distance. Give it a try. See if you can stack some stuff to climb up here. All right. Now let me call Dog. He loves to play fetch.
Risk. Looking back on Half-Life 2 now, 20 years later, it's sobering to reflect on how terrifying it was throughout much of the development. Game development is hard. You never really get what you'd like to have, which is be able to validate risk before you start to pile more on top of it. For example, our facial animation technology, it took probably 3 or 4 years of work before we were confident it was actually going to work, but we couldn't wait until then. In that first year, we immediately started making all kinds of other choices in our game design, our asset production, and our other technologies, all based on the assumption that our facial animation technology was going to work in the end, from a quality and performance standpoint. If it hadn't, many of those other choices wouldn't have worked either. At the same risk profile is true of other large choices we made early on. We can't wait. We just have to build, and hope that our guesses will be true years from now. Terrifying.
Throw another, dog. Another one, dog. Go ahead, dog. Throw. Throw another, dog. Another one, dog. Dog, go get your ball. No. Put that down. Scanners. Doc, come. Dad, Alex, do you read?
Alex! Honey,
What's going on in there?
where are you, Alex?
We're in the scrapyard airlock, stuck in a full auto cycle.
Is Gordon still with you?
He's right here.
Good. I want you to
Dad?
take Gordon out of here. Head for the coast. Do not go through Rafe.
Dad? Dad! Damn it! Dog, open the airlock. Get us out of here. Hurry, now! Tear it apart if you have to. Just get it open. That's enough, dog. Come on, Gordon. Come on!
As we finished up our work on Ravenholm, we couldn't shake the feeling that the transition from Eli's lab just wasn't working. It was far too abrupt. Eli's lab connected directly to the streets of the town where you'll be shortly, and the section you're standing in didn't exist. We had just made this promise at the end of Eli's lab: we don't go there anymore, and we liked the overall build-up we'd created. But when the player got to Ravenholm, they were immediately dropped into combat with zombies without any room for tension building. So we built this section and the subsequent tight corridors to address that in a way we were happy with. We slowed the pacing, focused on art and lighting, and got you ready to experience why we don't go to Ravenholm anymore.
Ravenholm Gameplay Focus. After watching many playtests of Ravenholm, we knew the core gameplay of the level revolved around the gravity gun and physics. Once equipped with that knowledge, we felt we could appropriately build the transition into Ravenholm and help the player learn and understand a bit about what the upcoming experience would be. This happens often. We build the level track, figure out what's working, and then design its prologue. We built the following set of rooms with that table setting in mind. The brutality of the tools we provide the player seemed to aid in setting the mood we were striving for, helping to shift the tone from the safety of Eli's lab to something darker and more frightening.
Bringing physics to the enemies. The physics traps in Ravenholm were some of the first gameplay elements in the level that we were really happy with, but they lacked player agency. It was the saw blades that helped us figure out what Ravenholm was truly about. With saw blades, the player was able to bring physics to the zombies instead of leading zombies into the physics. Once we had that understanding, Ravenholm evolved rapidly. We kept combing through the map, looking for anything, especially anything unusual, that could be turned into a tool or weapon for the player.
Player tools. By this point in the game, players have a lot of experience with Half-Life 2's physics, but they've just received the gravity gun, which provides a whole new way to interact with the physics objects in the game. We iterated on a variety of the physics objects that the player could play with, things like saw blades, the catapults, explosive canisters, traps, spears, and so on, and honed in on the ones that worked well with the physics gun and cut the ones that didn't. Then we went about stripping the levels of ammunition items so that the player had to rely on these objects to survive.
Contrived setups. There's a pretty obvious contrivance in a bunch of the gravity gun and physics object training. The player pulls a saw blade out of the wall with the gravity gun, and right on cue, a zombie stumbles around the corner, just begging to have a saw blade launched at it. Then the player crawls under a spinning blade trap to turn it off, and suddenly 3 zombies appear, taunting the player to switch the trap back on. We didn't have much time to iterate on this section, so we needed setups that worked for all players, not more open-ended ones that relied on them making the right move. While this kind of design has the potential to reduce players' creativity, in this case, we found that they didn't seem to mind that we forced their hand a little bit.
Paint cans. Once we started to succeed at making the gravity gun and physics gameplay the core of the Ravenholm experience, we started to go through the levels and look for objects that we might have overlooked as we were busy working with the really aggressive things like saw blades and exploding canisters. One of the things we found was the paint can, and it was simple enough for us to sort of reinforce player expectations by having the paint can splatter paint on the zombies when you threw one at them.
Ravenholm's development. We began developing Ravenholm early in the production of Half-Life 2, so it went through more than one full development pass. The first version predated the gravity gun, with gameplay focused on traditional zombie combat using guns and some of the physics traps. We even planned to showcase Ravenholm at E3 in 2002, but the game was ultimately unveiled a year later in 2003. By that point, we had invested heavily in Ravenholm's art, something which we generally avoid until the gameplay is fully proven. So once we went back to Ravenholm with the gravity gun mechanic in mind, we were working with a lot of pre-existing level geometry that had been designed with a very different gameplay goal in mind.
Misteaching flinches. Another memorable playtest and example of the danger of misteaching players occurred in Ravenholm. One of our design principles is for the game to respond to the player as much as possible. So when designing the gravity gun, it seemed obvious that if the player pointed it at a zombie and pulled the trigger, something should happen. It was simple enough to make it zap the zombie for a tiny amount of damage, causing the zombie to play its flinch animation, which felt good and responsive. Later, we watched a playtest where the tester discovered this interaction immediately upon arriving in Ravenholm, and interpreted it as a feedback that the gravity gun was hurting the zombie. Which it was, just not very much. So they zapped the zombie again, repeatedly, shocking it over and over until it died. This is a slow, unfun, inhumane way to fight zombies, especially where you're surrounded by saw blades and explosive canisters. Having learned our lesson, we removed that flinch animation, even though it meant losing that interaction between the zombie and the gravity gun. In this case, it was better to not have the simple interaction, rather than give the false impression that the gravity gun was an effective way to fight zombies. Even simple principles can require trade-offs when you get into the details.
Grigori Plaza. This open plaza is one of the areas that was fully detailed in our first development pass, and when we returned to it, we wanted to preserve as much of the existing art as possible while designing a new player path that used all 3 dimensions, moving players up and down, through windows, across rooftops, and between buildings. It wasn't a large space, so we had to squeeze as much track out of it as possible, and since that started as an art-focused area, it was light on gameplay and we needed to address that playtesters tended to fly right through it. And to top that off, it was already pushing our rendering performance budget with little room left for anything new. The challenge became finding small additions to slow the player down by adding threats around corners and into every nook and cranny of the level. Fire trap. This fire trap was originally intended as a visual showpiece for the fire system before a level designer repurposed it as a gameplay element for Ravenholm. It was almost cut many times during development due to the performance impact on the low-end PCs because of all the overdraw involved with the transparent sprites. In the end, there was a programmer who felt that it was important enough to the gameplay that it was worth doing the work to solve the performance issues and make sure we could get it into the game.
hallway cupboards. These junk-filled hallways were a simple solution to our need to slow the player down. With the constraint of preserving as much of the existing geometry as possible, combined with slow-moving zombies as the main enemy, it was tricky to stop players from just sprinting through here. Luckily, having Grigori as the crazed inhabitant of Ravenholm made these setups easy to justify. It makes good sense that he'd clog the stairwell to keep himself safe on the rooftops. In the end, Grigori's solution and ours were one and the same. Just throw a bunch of furniture in the way, because if it stops zombies, it'll probably slow the player down too.
Poison head crabs. This room unintentionally introduces poison head crabs. We'd spent a lot of time crafting their proper introduction later in the level, but once we saw how well they were playtesting, our excitement got the better of us, and before too long we'd scattered them throughout the level. By the time we realized they'd appeared before their intro, it was really too late to rework it. Fortunately, a tight room of poison head crabs works as decent training, because their design avoids a common issue with combat training. Typically, players are stressed and they can get frustrated if they die repeatedly without understanding why. And sure enough, we encountered that problem when trying to train the player with both poison head crabs and their source, the poison zombie. However, poison head crabs can't kill the player by themselves. So while stressful, a room full of them at least avoids that frustration.
Even with all the work we did to try and make a connection between this lever and the outside electric fence in the players' minds, some testers would still flip the lever and not know what they'd done. They'd even wander around, flip the lever back on, and wander around some more. With not much time to spend on making the connection clearer, we elected to just have the lever break off. This prevented players from undoing their progress and added to the feeling that Ravenholm was an unreliable and decaying environment.
Well done, brother. Make free use of my traps, but take care not to fall in them yourself. Behind you! In Ravenholm, you do well to be vigilant.
We all went to Ravenholm. When fans talk to us about Half-Life 2, Ravenholm is often the most remembered section. Thanks to its multiple development passes and the density of the material in it, more members of the team are represented in Ravenholm than anywhere else. It was where we figured out how to apply our artistic pipeline to the set pieces and mood we wanted, how physics and gameplay combined with the gravity gun, how headcrabs and zombies need to evolve for Half-Life 2, and much more. Looking back on it now, it reassures our belief in individual empowerment over centralized design. Ravenholm is dense, highly efficient in its gameplay and artistic execution, and the sum of many small contributions by individuals who understood how they could push it just a little further with their own unique capabilities.
Car Crusher lifts. Getting the Car Crushers to lift the player was also tricky. See, the player is always being simulated by both the physics system and the game's movement system. Each time we update the player's state, we compare the results from both systems and decide which one is right, then sync them up and repeat. This allows the two systems to influence each other. Like when the player stands on a seesaw, the physics lets the board give way, or when they stand on the Car Crusher, it lifts them up. While more complex, this dual system approach was easier to tune than trying to handle both physics and player movement in a single system. By keeping them separate, we could fine-tune the player movement system to feel good on its own, only reconciling the two when physics was affecting the player.
Car Crushers. These Car Crushers required some adjustments and quite a bit of work to our physics damage system. There's always a challenge when big physics objects interact with non-player characters. For instance, if the physics can push the NPC, it might shove them somewhere they're not supposed to go, leaving them unable to recover. This isn't a big issue for something like a headcrab, which can just hop out of a tricky situation, but for something like a zombie, it could mean they get stuck and end up helpless, flailing away in whatever gap they manage to wedge themselves into, which kind of kills the survival horror mood we're going for here.
Better and better. I am Father Grigori. You have already met my congregation. It is you, brother. I apologize. But no harm done. I will it to the least of your concerns.
Pacing switch. Now that the player's through the training section, we can start shifting the pacing from moody, claustrophobic spaces to more combat-focused action arenas. With the player familiar with the various physics tools in the environment, we can start mixing those into open spaces and just give the player the freedom to choose their approach.
Although they call me crazy, I care not, for thou art my helper, my strength, and my redeemer.
Tables and bodies. Towards the end of Ravenholm's production, with all the major pieces in place, we went through and tried to fill out every bit of empty space with something interesting. In doing so, we had to be careful to use what we already had and not create anything new, as we couldn't risk introducing more bugs. Often, as in this room, we were trying to add new moments of gameplay, while also adding more detail and storytelling to the area. Small scenes like this allow an attentive player to think about what they're seeing and what it might mean for what they'll encounter next.
Fast Zombie Introduction. This space was another area originally built for E3 2003, where it showcased the player fighting against a squad of Combine soldiers. When we returned to use it to introduce the Fast Zombie, we tried to keep as much of the previous work as possible. We wanted an iconic moonlit shot with zombies leaping past the moon like werewolves to draw the player's eye. Once that beat is over, we introduce the first Fast Zombie to the player space and send it at them. It took a lot of iteration to find the right balance of lighting for the scene to look good, while ensuring it also worked for the gameplay goals.
Brother! Come closer. You've stirred up hell. A man after my own heart. Here, I have a more suitable gun for you. You'll need it. Catch!
Poison Zombie Introduction. Constraining the player in a tight space while providing them with a view outward is a useful way to increase the chances that they'll notice something we want them to see. Here, we draw the player's attention with the sound of a wail before the poison zombie itself becomes visible. Originally, this encounter was also the first time players faced poison headcrabs, but as mentioned in an earlier node, we got far too enthusiastic in proliferating poison headcrabs around the level and ended up spoiling their joint introduction here. In the end, however, these first encounters worked better as separate instances anyway.
Gamma correction. Our game engine has a rendering system that's responsible for taking the entire state of the game and calculating a color value for every pixel on your screen to represent that state. But code and software from other people are involved in the process of calculating those pixels as well. As an example, the software and hardware in your GPU and monitor. At one point during development, we were unhappy with how our characters looked. In particular, we thought that they looked waxy or sickly. Their skin was wrong. We spent some time tuning our lighting, but we just couldn't get both our characters and our world to look right. Luckily, we still had a fully featured software renderer, which allowed us to run the game without a GPU, because this was an era where many players still didn't have one. And looking at the game on that renderer, we noticed that our lighting didn't have the same problem. So we went through our code with a fine-tooth comb, trying to figure out where our rendering code was doing something wrong when it was working with a GPU. After failing to do so, we tried talking to the GPU manufacturers, asking them to double-check they weren't doing anything wrong with the pixel values we were passing them. That was the start of a long journey, and long story short, it was a journey of almost 2 years of back-and-forth communication with GPU manufacturers before we were able to convince them that they were doing gamma correction incorrectly in the low-level math on their cards. During this, we'd even had to build a system that validated the color values of an individual pixel throughout the entirety of our rendering pipeline. But eventually, at the end, we finally got new drivers back from them, and our characters immediately looked like they should, matching the software render.
At this point in Ravenholm, the player has learned all the gameplay elements available to them and can predict their interactions. This allows us to build more complex setups, providing a greater level of threat and more freedom in how the player can approach each scenario. This arena is a deliberately entwined space that the player will need to explore, and we use that exploration time to slowly ramp up combat intensity. The faster the player explores, the faster we ramp it up. The freeform nature of this design made it challenging to tune, given the large dynamic range in how players played through it.
Warning. Blood toxin levels detected. Automatic military systems engaged. Morphine administered.
Playtester archetypes. Iteration and regular playtest were the lifeblood of Half-Life 2's production. Every week, we'd quietly watch over the shoulder of a player going through the section we were working on, taking notes on what worked and what didn't. It was important for us to test with a wide range of skill levels, to be sure that we weren't making decisions that only worked for some. Over time, we learned to choose specific types of playtesters based on the development stage we were at. Early on, we used experienced gamers, usually teammates, who could handle rough, unfinished areas and were good at explaining their thought process. For combat testing, we'd find players of all skill levels, especially those creative in their usage with the tools. Finally, as sections became more polished, we'd find some beginners, people who didn't play games much or weren't familiar with first-person shooters. Even if they weren't necessarily someone who might buy the game, we often learned something valuable from watching them.
Final Arena. When we finished the first pass over Ravenholm, this rooftop was intended to be the culminating fight. Like other spaces in Ravenholm, it had begun life as a space purely focused on being an interesting visual location. We felt it was important that, as the player left Ravenholm, they had a moment to look back over the town they had just survived and get a glimpse of where they were headed next. Multiple gameplay groups took a shot at building a fight here, but the tight geometry and performance constraints meant we never really created a finale we were happy with. Not unlike the Half-Life saga itself, it seemed as if Ravenholm was destined to not have a real ending. Final Arena. When we finished the first pass over Ravenholm, this rooftop was intended to be the culminating fight. Like other spaces in Ravenholm, it had begun life as a space purely focused on being an interesting visual location. We felt it was important that, as the player left Ravenholm, they had a moment to look back over the town they had just survived and get a glimpse of where they were headed next. Multiple gameplay groups took a shot at building a fight here, but the tight geometry and performance constraints meant we never really created a finale we were happy with. Not unlike the Half-Life saga itself, it seemed as if Ravenholm was destined to not have a real ending.
Toxin levels. Detect emergency. User dead imminent. Seek medical attention.
Final Arena. When we finished the first pass over Ravenholm, this rooftop was intended to be the culminating fight. Like other spaces in Ravenholm, it had begun life as a space purely focused on being an interesting visual location. We felt it was important that, as the player left Ravenholm, they had a moment to look back over the town they had just survived and get a glimpse of where they were headed next. Multiple gameplay groups took a shot at building a fight here, but the tight geometry and performance constraints meant we never really created a finale we were happy with. Not unlike the Half-Life saga itself, it seemed as if Ravenholm was destined to not have a real ending.
Greetings, brother. And so we meet at last. You are to be commended for avoiding my traps. The work of a man who once had too much time on his hands and now finds time for nothing but the work of salvation. I suspect you have little wish to remain in Ravenholm, so I will show you to the mines. As for me, a shepherd must tend to his flock, especially when they have grown unruly. Follow me, brother, and tread lightly, for this is hallowed ground.
Response rules. We knew early on that we wanted a lot of dynamic dialogue in-game, so we needed a system to handle it effectively. We aimed for a system that allowed sound designers to add and tweak lines without involving programmers, made the dialogue tightly responsive to the game's state, and minimized repetition. With these requirements, we created the response rules system. Whenever a character speaks outside of a choreographed scene, this system determines which line to deliver. Rather than picking up lines directly, character AI is constantly flagging opportunities for speech whenever a relevant event happens. Spotting the player, getting hurt, firing a last round in a gun, encountering overwhelming enemies, and so on. With each opportunity, it sends the response rule system a packet of data about the game's current state, and the system returns the most fitting dialogue line, if there is any. This setup allowed our sound designers to create a detailed decision matrix for dialogue. For example, a character might have a different set of lines for announcing a reload while under fire versus after the end of a fight, or if only one ally is left standing, or if there's a strider in sight, etc. By the time we shipped Half-Life 2, we felt we'd only scratched the surface of this system's potential. It became a core feature of Episode 1's Alyx, and went on to power the dynamic dialogue in our later games, including TF2's classes and the cast of Left 4 Dead.
Stay close to me, brother.
The real Final Arena. Very late in the development of Half-Life 2, when we were reviewing the entire game for final improvement opportunities, we decided we did, in fact, want a real finale for Ravenholm. The rooftop fight wasn't enough. After some discussion, we chose to add this final fight through the graveyard with Grigori alongside the player. It was risky, development-wise, but we felt the game needed it. Since we were near the end of production, we had a mature set of gameplay tools to work with, but even more importantly, by this point, we understood our own game. Making a game is often a process of learning what it is you're actually creating. Why is our game fun? How is it different? What are the most important elements? As we built the game and watched playtesters go through it, we learned answers to those questions and, in turn, got better at making it. So the graveyard came together quickly and required far less iteration than many earlier areas of the game.
Woe to thee! Follow me. Quickly, brother. Hurry while I hold the gate! Farewell, brother. I fear I deliver you to a darker place.
The complex route the player takes to safely navigate this mineshaft gives them plenty of time to see what's waiting for them at the bottom. And surprise, it's headcrabs. Honestly, it's often headcrabs. But in this case, it's poison headcrabs, which are fun by themselves, but a real riot when you add fast headcrabs into the mix. These two guys make a great combination. Neither is particularly dangerous on its own, but together they're incredibly lethal. Once poisoned, a single hit from a fast headcrab is enough to kill the player. And this is what biologists call symbiosis. At least that's what we think.
Major fracture detected.
Sniper Alley. This section of Game Track was added late in development, after we moved Eli's lab and Ravenholm to come before Coast. While you might think that we build the game linearly, we actually split up into 3 different groups and worked in parallel on different sections, starting mostly in the middle of the game. Each group's first pass focused on nailing down the core of their section before they moved on. And then once we had a rough version of the whole game laid out, we went back over each section to polish it, adding successful elements from other areas and removing what wasn't working. In some cases, such as in Ravenholm, entire sections were moved. And then, after Ravenholm was relocated, we needed a new piece to connect it to the coast, which is the area you're entering now. Given the time constraints, this short section was built using existing, proven gameplay elements, like snipers and combine soldiers.
Half-Life 2's physics gave us a variety of tools to make combat more exciting. For instance, when enemies miss the player, we subtly redirect their shots toward breakable objects nearby, adding mayhem and creating that action movie feel. We also employed physics to add hints. We created what we called ragdoll magnets across the game to make enemy corpses fall in interesting and dramatic ways, such as off ledges or into the path of a train.
Snipers. The Half-Life 2 team was never very large, so we were always looking for ways to create new gameplay without high asset production costs. The Sniper is a great example. It has no actual model, just a laser beam, so it required no art or animation support. When it dies, it simply spawns a Combine Soldier ragdoll and launches it out the window. Despite that simplicity, we got a lot of unique gameplay from it. We were especially happy with how it interacted with the physics objects in the game world. Players are used to exploiting explosive objects near enemies, so it felt fitting to have an enemy that flipped that dynamic when the player was in cover.
Who's hurt?
Winston's been hit.
Patch him up and get him to the back as soon as he's stable. Gordon Freeman. It's incredible you made it. We've been getting communication from Alex. I'll see if I can reach her again. Follow me. It's Leon. We're all clear. And I've got Gordon Freeman.
Dr. Freeman, you're kidding. Look, I've been on the line with Alex. Her father's been captured.
Over here, Dr. Freeman.
Eli Vance is indispensable to the liberation.
Coast kickoff. This interstitial scene came along late in development to connect Ravenholm to Coast. Noticing a trend? Quite a bit of the connective tissue in our games comes together late. In this case, that meant cutting corners wherever possible. We didn't even have time to animate Alex on the monitor. These kinds of scenes are always a challenge to make interesting, and we didn't succeed with this one. It's a good example of what happens when NPCs are treated like signposts without adding character to them or the scene. The result is a forgettable moment where the game's seams show. But that's the nature of development. You only have so much time, and you have to decide where to spend it. Kleiner's lab and Eli's lab were much more important, so that's where we focused our efforts.
Post road? He won't last 5 minutes on foot. It's spawning season for the antlions.
That's why I called you, Leon. I was hoping you still had the scout car we left with you last summer. The one my dad rigged with the Tau cannon.
Yeah, good idea. Hold on a sec. Norco? Bring the buggy out. Put it on the dock right now. Gordon Freeman will be driving it.
Will do. I just finished mounting an ammo crate on the back.
Good timing. Okay, Alex, we're all set.
Thanks, Leon. Gordon, I haven't driven the coast in over a year, but I have no reason to think it's gotten any safer. Meet me in the depot where the trains unload. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in Nova Prospect. Bye for now.
Bye, Alex. Okay, Doc. Before you hit the road, you might want to grab some med kits, restock on ammo, maybe check the map, see where you're headed. There's an ammo supply crate on the back of the car, if that's any comfort. Stay with the car, make use of the thumpers. You'll stand a fair chance against the antlions. I'll radio ahead to let the next base know you're coming. Shore point to NLO. Shore point to New Little Odessa. Come in, Odessa. Do you read?
Hello, Dr. Freeman. The car's all ready for you.
Buggy model. The buggy's model went through many iterations before reaching its final version. We cycled through designs that satisfied both our artistic and physics simulation needs, but then hit an unexpected issue. Many playtesters, even experienced FPS players, were getting motion sick while driving it. Along with some simulation tweaks, we discovered that altering the buggy model helped. The more the model obscured the world, the worse the motion sickness became. So we began stripping away parts of the model, removing more and more of the body until players stopped feeling sick. In particular, being able to see the ground through the missing undercarriage made a noticeable difference.
Buggy introduction. We wanted something more engaging for the buggy's introduction than just having the player hop in and drive away. The crane helped with that. Crucially, we needed players to learn how to recover the buggy when it flips over, and this sequence forced them into that situation. Training under pressure is always tricky. We wanted to emphasize the antlion infestation as the reason to stay inside the buggy. So we kept the antlion threat active and provided a couple of citizens on mounted guns for support. A small bonus, players also get the experience of being lifted by the crane just before they'll get to operate one.
Buggy training course. This training section was designed to let the player play around with her buggy. At the time Half-Life 2 was released, this level of physical simulation in the vehicle was novel, so we wanted to give players ample opportunity to experiment with it. The player has also just left the tight confines of Ravenholm, and we liked giving them the contrast and reward of being able to move quickly through a large space, feeling safe inside a vehicle. We made sure to require a turbo jump to get out of this area, which doubled as a test to make sure they'd reached a level of comfort in their driving, and also ensured that they didn't leave their buggy behind.
Good, here we go.
Buggy physics. The physics for a buggy took a lot of trial and error. We wanted it to feel fast, even though its top speed was only about 35 miles an hour. So we had to do some cheating to make it work. We added extra vertical force to the turbo jump and a bit of kick to the rear when using the handbrake to power slide. Without those, the low speed meant the buggy just wasn't fun to drive. On top of that, the world was full of unpredictable physics system-driven chaos. Players were bound to drive the buggy into all kinds of collisions, so we had to make sure that they could always get out. This took a lot of experimenting and playtesting. In the end, we settled on a pretty goofy, unrealistic simulation that made the buggy more forgiving and harder to flip. Its center of gravity is super low, and the wheels, while they look like they turn a lot, actually don't. It was our first attempt at a physically simulated vehicle, and we learned a ton from it. Thanks to that, we were able to make the muscle car in Episode 2 much easier to drive.
Transition tunnels. Building the coast required us to develop a way to handle level transitions. To move from one level to another, we need to save everything in the transition space as the player leaves the first level and restored in the next level after loading. Critically, we also have to save and restore everything visible to the player in the transition area, even if it lies outside the space itself. For this reason, we aim to keep transition spaces as small and enclosed as possible. In most of the game, a small room works well for this purpose, but on the coast, we needed a different solution. After some experimentation, we settled on dark tunnels. Besides being reusable in a believable way, the tunnels allowed us to add a bright light flare at the end to mask the fact that we can't render what's ahead of the player because it exists in an entirely different level.
Buggy sound engine. The audio for the buggy was challenging because we wanted it to feel like a really powerful vehicle that's driving along at super high speed, even though the maps aren't really big enough to support that, and the buggy doesn't really leave first gear, and it has a top speed of maybe 35 miles an hour. Now, in our defense, 35 miles an hour is still pretty fast, especially back in 2004. In addition to the speed, the driving inputs are really simple. So with a keyboard as your target input device, the player's controls are basically binary. So the buggy's either accelerating or not accelerating, it's turning fully in one direction or not. So essentially, we need to create all this audio complexity to represent a simulation where the complexity doesn't actually exist. So we build a fake engine for the buggy's audio. It's got its own transmission, and we combine the player's inputs with data from the physics simulation. We measure the torque on each simulated wheel, whether it's spinning or making contact, and we create a set of looping sounds and then carefully blend between them as the fake engine shifts gears in response to the wheel data. And we just basically kept trying different things. We added more complexity. We did some fine-tuning until the buggy just feels more fun and sort of rewards you for that feeling of going fast. And most players, they don't really comment on it other than saying the buggy sounds good, and to us that's the success, given the amount of craziness that was going on under the hood.
Dumpers. Whenever possible, there's a lot of value in players feeling like they've figured something out on their own. It makes the world feel more alive, rather than just a series of gameplay elements lined up for the player. If we can accept the risk that some percentage of players might miss an element entirely, we can take a more subtle approach. We took this approach with Thumpers, designing setups the players are likely to encounter, but aren't forced to engage with. There are plenty of visual and audio cues, as well as inline reactions, to help the player understand what's happening. It doesn't guarantee all players will figure it out, but playtesting showed that most did.
Antlions. With the player driving the buggy throughout the coast, we needed a pervasive enemy that could justifiably appear anywhere and act as a constant threat to keep the player in or near their buggy. Antlions spawning from the sand were the perfect solution. Their high mobility allowed them to keep up with the buggy for short bursts, unlike our humanoid enemies. Plus, they were very satisfying to run over.
Coast. We wanted a wide open section of the game for the buggy, but we still needed a way to constrain the player's movement. Choosing a coastline gave us a natural boundary along one side of the map while still feeling open and expansive. It also helped visualize the effects of the Combine's extraction of Earth's resources. Playtesters still tried to swim out to sea, so we added leeches to deter them. The leeches couldn't be a real avoidable enemy the players felt they could fight, so they're a bit magical. Players generally understood that they were pushing the game's boundaries, so we didn't overdevelop them.
Grenade House. A lot of a Half-Life game is about giving players slightly novel combat experiences around each corner, even if they're just small tweaks on previous ones. They don't all have to be skill-based challenges. Sometimes they can just be fun moments where the player gets to enjoy themselves. This Grenade House is one of those moments, with the twist being that we've inverted the usual setup. Instead of letting the player drop grenades on enemies below, we've put the enemies above. The unlimited grenade box is a somewhat clumsy way to encourage players to engage with the scenario, but its invulnerability also ensures the players can still climb up to the floor above, even if they've blown up everything else.
Antlion design. In some of the earliest design work for the game, we had plans for multiple core alien races, with the Combine being just one of them. One of the other races was a religious insectoid species, and antlions were part of that. Later, as we developed Coast, we started viewing them more as pests that came through the Zen portals, along with headcrabs and other creatures. While they aren't actually from Zen, they infest the corners of any world they enter, a lot like cockroaches.
Buggy sound design. The sound design for the buggy was based on samples from an old 1968 Camaro. And we chose that car because they have these amazing V8 engines with just huge pistons. And there's not really another sound like it. It has this sort of gutsy, visceral sound that we were looking for. The transmission also has this really wonderful mechanical whine when it stops accelerating. And that combination felt really responsive within this basically binary input system that we had to work with. So the fake engine transmission wasn't modeled after a real-world car. Instead, it was just designed as a simple system to reward the player for holding down the accelerator. So it's like a looping escalator that produces a rising tone, constantly building tension and shifting gears whenever the tone needs to restart. And since the player would quickly run out of space in our relatively small maps, the goal was just to make accelerating fun for a short period of time.
Open world loot. The openness of Coast introduced a new problem for us in how we distributed item rewards. In a Half-Life game, we typically reward players for exploring. If you see the way forward but notice something off to the side, there's probably something useful if you take the time to search. When we first started playtesting our coast maps, we tucked rewards away in the corners of the outdoor areas. However, this led to a worse experience with the buggy. The wide open spaces meant there were always lots of small areas that looked like they might contain something, and players kept stopping and getting out of the buggy to search. It became tedious and interrupted the fun of the level. So, we removed those scattered rewards, but this raised a new problem. How do we tell the player when it's worth getting out of the buggy? After some thought, we established a rule. Any kind of human construction would always come with gameplay content and exploration rewards, while purely natural areas would be left empty. We couldn't tell players this directly, but it aligned well with their natural assumptions, and we reinforced it consistently with areas like this.
Buggy birds. In one memorable coast playtest, a player returned to their vehicle after exploring a house and happened to see a bird flying past. They yelled at the bird, telling it to stay away from their buggy, complaining that birds often foul up their cars in real life. In our post-playtest discussion, we realized that this was the first time we'd had objects separate from the player that the player actually cared about. We saw it as an opportunity to explore, so we built a system to deliver the moment that playtesters feared. When the player leaves their buggy alone for a while and is out of sight, we spawn a seagull at a random location on the vehicle frame. As time goes on, the seagull spawns poop decals on the car body beneath it and continues until the player returns, at which point it flies away. Naturally, playtesters wanted to be able to clean their vehicle, so we added the ability to wash the car by driving it into shallow water. It was late enough in development that we already had the tech for all of this, so the feature was quick to implement. It's one of those cases where we know only a small percentage of players will discover it. But if we can implement these kind of details efficiently and have enough of them, most players will encounter at least one.
Boathouse. In Half-Life 1, we discovered we could get a lot of value from scenarios where different AI enemies fight each other. It's fun for players to watch them engage, and it's much easier to observe enemy behavior when you're not the one that's being threatened. This first encounter between antlions and Combine soldiers is designed to be a fun opportunity to ram something with the buggy, but it also serves to highlight the thumper. By seeing the soldiers use the thumper to hold off antlions, we hoped more players would come to understand its purpose. We liked how the soldiers demonstrated the value of staying near the thumper while engaging with the antlions.
Flying vehicle audio. The large flying enemies in the game present a unique audio challenge. During combat, they're much more mobile than other enemies, and they often move a significant distance away from the player. They're also really dangerous if they have line of sight. So these factors led us to focus on an audio solution specifically around occlusion. In other words, when you can see the enemy and when the enemy can see you. And we wanted to make a clear audio distinction between when they have that line of sight. So the flying vehicle engine sounds are made up of multiple looping sounds that we play simultaneously. And some of those loops are processed by the DSP system based on the space you're in, while others are played directly and unprocessed. So the DSP system adds more of an environment echoing effect when we run sound through that system. So when the flying object is occluded behind something, it can't see you, we increase the percentage of loops that go through the DSP processing, and it sounds like that object is a little more distant. And then when that enemy emerges from behind an object and it can see you, we play more of the direct sound. So that overall just gives you a sense that the sound is either distant and directionless or more directly in your line of sight. And you can sort of hear it when a helicopter emerges from behind a building. Ideally, you can really hear that difference.
Combine gunship. The gunship was an interesting problem. We had a helicopter flight model already and didn't really have time to build something completely new. So we tuned the helicopter's flight model until it felt different enough, and then derived the gunship's organic animation state from the values coming out of that simulation. We also tried to keep it as truthful as possible. For example, there's a limit as how much it can turn its head to aim its cannon, and if it needs to aim beyond that, it has to alter its flight path to bring the cannon around to bear. It's not allowed to just cheat. The other key feature was its engine sound. We have sound spatialization, so the player can tell roughly where it is, but the gunship is a fast-moving object, and it's up in the air, away from any nearby reference points. As a result, it can be hard to tell exactly how far away it is and how fast it's moving. To fix that, we added a Doppler effect to the engine sound, pitch shifting it based on the gunship's velocity relative to you. It's a subtle effect, but it's extremely effective at subconsciously helping you perceive the gunship's location and direction, critical information letting you know that you're being hunted by it.
This steerable rocket launcher.
Odessa Cubbage. Odessa Cubbage is an example of the kind of cameo character we found works well. He's an entertaining guy with some entertaining details, living inside his own little bubble. Since he doesn't leave his scenario, he's free to be exaggerated enough to stand out. We started with his model, which was repurposed from a cut section of the game, and named him after the title of a spam email we received. The model was originally a Norwegian fisherman, and it didn't quite fit as an Englishman, so we slapped a mustache on him, and in that moment, Odessa's character was born. He's ultimately a charlatan, with everything about him being fake. His accent, his mustache, everything. He would never put himself in danger, making him the perfect person to hand Gordon the RPG and explain exactly how to use it.
Laser-guided RPG. The laser guidance feature of the RPG was a huge headache for us because it was difficult to teach. Many playtesters would fire the RPG and then immediately duck behind cover, which meant they didn't see the rocket's flight path. Even worse, they didn't realize the rocket was now turning around to fly back at them. We tried various HUD elements and laser dot indicators to help, but found that most players overlooked them, focusing on the enemy instead. We made as many small improvements as we could, like emphasizing the feature in Odessa's speech and enhancing the audio and visuals around how the gunship shoots down direct RPG shots. While these changes helped some players grasp the feature, we never reached a point where we felt confident that almost everyone understood it. We even considered cutting the feature entirely, but gunship combat without it was much less interesting. The laser guidance forced the player to keep the gunship in sight while the rocket was in flight, but that also meant the gunship had line of sight back, creating a tension we loved.
Colonel Odessa Cubbage at your service.
Gunship! Damn. Let me just send a warning to Lighthouse Point.
Good luck in Nova Prospect, Dr. Freeman.
That's that. I gather you've disposed of that gunship, Dr. Freeman. Your reputation, sir, is well deserved. I shall have someone open the gate for you immediately so that you can drive on. I understand that Dr. Vance is in great need. Use extreme caution when approaching the bridge. Radio silence from that outpost leads me to believe it has come under Combine control. Still, you're clearly the right man for the job. You'll make it through if anyone can. Farewell. And please tell Dr. Vance that Colonel Cubbage regrets not having been able to rescue him in person.
The Freeman must now hurry on. The Eli Vance is held in distress most dire. Their reason for delay.
NLO to Lighthouse Point. NLO to Lighthouse Point. Come in. Get going, Dr. Freeman. We know Eli Vance is depending on you. Bring your car up here, and I'll open the gate for you. Get your car, Doc. He won't get far on foot. Get your car, Doc. He won't get far on foot. Get your car, Doc. He won't get far on foot. Bring your car up here, and I'll open the gate for you. Bring your car up here, and I'll open the gate for you.
E2 Coast 04. This map was actually the first area of coast that we built, before the crane and other elements existed. The drained seabed and rusted ships were some of the earliest pieces of art direction we developed. Years later, we showcased the map in our 2003 E3 demonstration, though much of the gameplay was still being figured out at the time. As a result, when we began building out the entire coast section, that demonstration became a useful vision for us to work toward.
Audio over distance. The large-scale spaces in the coast maps led us to seek an audio solution for how sound changes over distance. So for instance, in these maps, an enemy can be well over 100 yards away, and their gun should sound different at that range than when it's up close. We decided to store our sounds in a single stereo file with the near sound in the left channel and the far sound in the right channel. And then during playback, we crossfade, or we change the proportion of sound you hear between those two channels based on the player's distance from the sound. And it was a simple solution that worked well. It helped us with memory constraints. You can easily hear it in action. Just listen to how a Combine soldier's gunshots change as you drive towards them.
We wanted the buggy to be more than just a means of travel, so we decided to attach a gun to it.
We chose the Tower Cannon, a Half-Life 1 weapon we liked but hadn't found a place for it in Half-Life 2. The Tower Cannon can shoot through walls, which makes it tricky for level design, so we limited it to the coast section. Once you introduce wall-penetrating weapons, level design becomes much tougher. Furthermore, we mounted an ammunition crate on the back of the buggy, giving the player unlimited SMG ammo throughout Coast. This was especially helpful for playtesters who struggled with the infinite antlions spawning from the sand.
Crane. The crane took a lot of fine-tuning to get right. Something that needed to generate so much physical force was always risky, given the limitations of our rigid body physics and destruction technology. For example, the magnet was never going to fully meet player expectations for something with that much mass. But because the crane was stationary, we could carefully choose everything within its range and fine-tune as needed. Fortunately, most players didn't seem to notice its rougher edges, likely because of the sheer novelty of interacting with something like it in a vaguely realistic physics environment.
Ramming with the buggy. Our physics system is based on rigid bodies, which means it doesn't support any deformation or destruction of objects. If a physical object is hit by something, it can move if allowed, but otherwise nothing happens. So, when you drive the buggy through a glass window, we have to employ some trickery to make things work as expected. Because the window is fixed in place, the physics simulation will actually bounce the buggy off the window. But it does notify our game system that a collision occurred. The game system handles destruction, so it breaks the window into glass shards and tells the physics system to start simulating them. Crucially, the game system also tells the physics system to restore the buggy's state to where it was before the collision. This ensures that the next time physics is simulating, the buggy will drive freely through the now destroyed window. This process does produce a one-frame hitch in the buggy's physics, as it briefly stops and is teleported back to the instant before the impact. We're sorry if knowing this has made Half-Life 2 totally unplayable, but after watching playtests at the time, we decided we actually liked the momentary hitch. It added to the sense of impact.
Opportunistic moments. Some memorable moments in the game come from the interactions of multiple game systems, but sometimes we realize these moments are likely to happen only rarely. When that's the case, we often wish more players would experience them. There's a tension here. The more we know players will encounter something, the more effort we can put into it. But if it feels too artificial, the moment can come across as forced, and players may not respond as positively. The gunship cinematic depth is an example where we nudge things a bit, trying to increase the chances of a memorable moment without being too obvious. The design of this area and the gunship's flight path make it likely that the player and the gunship are in the right spots when it dies. If they are, we trigger the gunship's crash into the cars. If not, it dies in the usual way. It's totally gamey, but playtesters didn't seem to mind when the moment played out well.
Roller mines. Roller mines were created to fill the need for an enemy that could threaten players while driving the buggy. Since the player in the buggy was essentially a fully physically simulated entity, we thought it would be interesting to also have a physically simulated enemy. The Manhack had already shown us how this approach could lead to an enemy with lots of interesting interactions with the world. So we built the roller mine, a ball whose movement is entirely driven by generating torque on itself, and iterated on its behavior until it was fun to drive against. Roller mines aren't particularly dangerous to the buggy, but if you let them stack up, they can become a problem, especially near a cliffside. We also made sure they worked well when the player's on foot, allowing level designers to get a few extra encounters out of them.
Ambush. One of the general challenges of a Half-Life style FPS is that the player is constantly moving forward into spaces they don't know. This means that when they find themselves in combat, they're in unfamiliar areas with no knowledge of how to approach the fight. We use many different methods to help the player with this problem, and this ambush is one example. Upon arrival, the player fights a group of Combine among these houses. During the fight and the exploration afterward, the player has the chance to learn the arena layout. Then, when the player explores up into this attic, we spawn a second wave of Combine. In that second fight, the player now has the advantage of knowing the layout, allowing them to make more tactical decisions in defending against the ambushers.
Crossbow. This is the player's first opportunity to get the crossbow in the game, and looking back, it's somewhat surprising we didn't gate it. It's entirely possible for the player to drive right past it. To make that less likely, we set up the roadblock and vantage point to encourage players to get out of the buggy, at which point they'd spot the crossbow and item crate. Playtesting showed that almost every player stopped and collected the weapon, but this is a case where the difference between playtesting and real play might matter. A playtester who's been playing since the start of Coast may not be as fatigued with exploration as someone who's been playing from the very beginning of the game. So, we placed another crossbow a few levels ahead, directly on the player's path in Nova Prospect.
Gas station. We had grand plans for this encounter. We envisioned building a gas station that the player would fight around, likely igniting the gas tanks and setting fire to everything. We imagined the player driving away from a raging fire, but budget and performance were harsh constraints in 2003, and the station had to keep getting smaller and simpler to fit into Coast's large levels. Our plans for a dynamic fire system didn't materialize, and building it no longer made sense. There's always a limit to how much work we can justify for a single encounter. In the end, the only remnants of our original vision are the explosive gas tanks.
Area portals. One performance challenge we faced in Coast was handling wide open spaces that included buildings with highly detailed interiors, or at least they were detailed by 2003 standards. When the player was outside, we wanted to allocate as much of our budget as possible to rendering that space, without losing resources to the building interiors. But unless we were willing to board up every window and door, the player could still see inside. To solve this, we created a feature called area portals, placing one in every open window and door. An area portal precomputes a flat image of the building's interior, and during play, when the player is some distance away, the area portal displays this precomputed image over the window or door, allowing us to skip rendering the actual interior. As the player approaches, we smoothly crossfade between the area portal's image and the building's actual contents. With careful use, area portals helped us to meet our performance goals on Coast, along with the occasional door that closed itself behind you.
Occlusion. In Half-Life 1 and much of Half-Life 2, the world consisted mainly of enclosed tunnels and corridors, which worked well with a binary space partition, or BSP tree. Essentially, this tech allowed us to quickly sort through the geometry and determine what might be visible in the player's view. But the open areas in Coast and other outdoor sections didn't suit that approach, so we needed some new tech. Area portals were one, allowing us to carve out the world into discrete chunks separated by portals. Doors and windows, that is, not aperture science ones. We also developed an additional occlusion system, which basically said that if the player can't see through, over, or around a large object, don't render what's on the other side. This might seem an obvious thing not to do, but it takes some work to make sure that calculating what's on the other side of the big thing isn't slower than just rendering everything. So to make that calculation fast, level designers placed large occlusion volumes inside major terrain shapes and big occluding objects like buildings, and during rendering, we could then test the bounds of entities against these volumes to avoid rendering anything the player couldn't see. Detail objects. Once we had outdoor sections running, it was clear they needed some form of high-frequency detail, so we added small foliage elements, like grass and shrubs, across the displacement terrain. But we knew we couldn't afford, which is to say we didn't have the time, to hand-place them all. So we built the Detail Object System, which generates small foliage elements automatically based on the displacement material. Each material specifies the type of foliage to place, along with a set of parameters. At map compile time, the system calculates random points on the surface and selects foliage to place there. Given performance constraints, there was still a fairly complex hand-authoring process for foliage texture sheets, allowing us to render all of them in a single pass.
Terrain and performance. Our performance budget was often a significant constraint when it came to combat, and even more so for combat on terrain surfaces. When NPCs move, they perform many small spatial probes to determine if they can safely navigate their chosen path. To help visualize it, imagine they can't see and are constantly waving a stick in front of themselves to check if the way is clear. The performance cost of these probes increases with the complexity of the world geometry. Our terrain displacement system creates uneven surfaces using many polygons, far more than the perfectly flat floors found elsewhere. This meant that NPCs moving on coast terrain were more resource-intensive than in other areas, and that constraint dictated the scale of many encounters in this section of the game.
Detail objects. Once we had outdoor sections running, it was clear they needed some form of high-frequency detail, so we added small foliage elements, like grass and shrubs, across the displacement terrain. But we knew we couldn't afford, which is to say we didn't have the time, to hand-place them all. So we built the Detail Object System, which generates small foliage elements automatically based on the displacement material. Each material specifies the type of foliage to place, along with a set of parameters. At map compile.
Terrain and performance. Our performance budget was often a significant constraint when it came to combat, and even more so for combat on terrain surfaces. When NPCs move, they perform many small spatial probes to determine if they can safely navigate their chosen path. To help visualize it, imagine they can't see and are constantly waving a stick in front of themselves to check if the way is clear. The performance cost of these probes increases with the complexity of the world geometry. Our terrain displacement system creates uneven surfaces using many polygons, far more than the perfectly flat floors found elsewhere. This meant that NPCs moving on coast terrain were more resource-intensive than in other areas.
The bridge. This bridge section was inspired by the Deception Pass Bridge, just up the road from Valve's office. We initially built this section as a pure navigation puzzle, gradually layering more gameplay into it. It also became the primary test case for our players' edge friction. In our movement system, we subtly increase friction on the player's deceleration as they approach the edge of a surface. Players have never noticed it, likely because it aligns naturally with their goal of stopping at the edge to look down, matching human tendency to move more slowly and carefully near a drop. But it's a critical feature for this part of the game. We know this because at one point during development, we accidentally broke it, and suddenly all of our playtesters started repeatedly falling to their deaths.
Bridge playtesting. The bridge section was always a high point in playtests, with testers consistently having strong reactions to it. The tension they felt while slowly making their way over the girders was visible in their movements. Over time, we layered more challenges into the traversal, and playtests only became more entertaining to watch. From the train rumbling across the bridge and shaking the player, to a surprise head crab in a shack that seemed like a safe haven midway through, we did feel a little guilty relishing the playtesters' visible stress, but we weren't total monsters. After players made it across the bridge, they'd breathe a sigh of relief, disable the Combine shield, and then realize they had to return across the underside. Concerned they might be bored on the second trip, we decided to add a gunship to keep them company out on the girders.
Bridge gunship. We were particularly happy with the gunship fight, despite it being tricky to set up given the level geometry. Being on the underside of the bridge allowed the gunship to move fully around the player, using all 3 dimensions to position itself above and below at different moments. The girders provide plenty of high-frequency cover, creating opportunities for the gunship fire to produce a fun and dynamic visual and audio display.
Ramming zombies with the buggy. As human beings, we have expectations for our physical world, as mentioned a few times in this commentary. One of those expectations is, if you hit a zombie with your car, it should get absolutely booted into the air. But getting this effect in-game isn't as straightforward as it is in the real world. For performance reasons, enemies like the zombie use a simplified collision box during gameplay. This is a box that fits snugly around the zombie with no part of the model sticking out. But when the zombie dies, it's converted into a ragdoll with more accurate, per-limb collision boxes, though this is more expensive to simulate. This change in collision representation adds further complexity when you ram a zombie with the buggy, beyond just the frame hitch. When the buggy first collides with the zombie, it touches the zombie's simplified collision box. The game then kills the zombie, converting it into a ragdoll that the physics system begins to simulate. Now, with more accurate per-limb collision, the closest part of the zombie may be several inches away from the buggy. As a result, the next time the physics system simulates, the zombie starts falling from gravity because the buggy is no longer pushing it. While it's only a short moment before the buggy reaches the zombie again, this small discrepancy made ramming zombies unsatisfying. They often fell out of the player's view. To fix this, we saved the force the zombie's collision box received when hit by the buggy, and applied that same force to the ragdoll after conversion. We also added a slight upward force to the ragdoll, launching it a bit. With these tweaks, zombies reliably folded over the front of the buggy when hit, which better matched player expectations.
28 transitions later. After stringing together a few levels with dark tunnels as transition spaces, we realized we could subvert player expectations by building another one that appeared to be a transition, but instead contained something else. Like everyone else, we saw 28 Days Later in 2002, loved it, and immediately wanted to create an escalating zombie encounter in one of our dark tunnels. It came together quickly, and we were pleased with the result. Years later, we met Alex Garland, the writer of the film. He had played and enjoyed Half-Life 2, and we confessed that his movie inspired this section.
Flashlight power. The decision to have both Sprint and the flashlight share the HEV suit power was a controversial one in Half-Life 2. Initially, only Sprint used suit power, which made sense as it was meant to be only a short burst of speed. The flashlight, on the other hand, could be used indefinitely, but playtesting revealed an issue. Players often left dark areas without realizing their flashlight was still on. In brightly lit open areas like Coast, our performance budget couldn't support the flashlight being on continuously, so we needed a way to turn it off without player involvement. Limiting its power seemed like a simple solution, with the benefit of adding some tension to dark areas too. The challenge then became, what resource should it use? We already had suit power and didn't want to clutter the UI with a new resource just for the flashlight. We toyed with the idea of other player abilities using suit power, thinking it might be interesting to have players make trade-offs between them. This is a good example of game design often being about choosing between imperfect solutions. We didn't love the idea of Sprint and flashlight sharing a resource, but we also didn't want multiple resources cluttering the UI. In Episode 2, with no plans to add anything else that consumed suit power, we ultimately decided to give the flashlight its own separate resource.
D2, Coast 9. Late in Coast development, we reached a point where our game code was far enough ahead of our level design that our gameplay programmers were looking for more code to write and new tasks that could help Half-Life 2 ship. This was largely due to the demands of Coast levels, which placed a heavy burden on our level designers with their sheer scale and extensive terrain usage. As a result, our gameplay programmers began designing smaller scale encounters. Later, when our level designers caught up, they created this level by stitching together 3 separate encounters from the programmers and performing all the necessary finishing work to prepare it for release.
planted.
Battery finding. With the increased density of objects in Half-Life 2's gameplay spaces, we thought it would be interesting to have players search for a specific item, especially if there was some logic to where it might be found. This way, players could locate the item either through careful observation and deduction, or just by brute force searching the area. Since we already had models for cars and batteries, it was a natural step to create a small junkyard for players to explore. We also hid a couple of extra batteries in unexpected places for the players who chose the brute force method. As with other item-based puzzles, this one needed a failsafe in case players lost the batteries. You can try throwing all of them over the cliff if you want to see what happens.
Performance constraints. For the final Coast arena, we envisioned a big finale where the player and a squad of citizens would hold out against waves of Combine soldiers, culminating in a gunship battle. Unfortunately, the computational cost of having soldiers and friendly allies moving around on terrain meant that the battle kept being scaled back to fit within our performance budget. By the time we were down to featuring only a single squad of soldiers at any given time, we were already late in development. Too late to make large-scale changes to the arena to accommodate more enemies, we had to redesign the flow of the fight to keep the number of soldiers to a minimum.
Hey, over here!
buggy removal. Once we reached the point where we wanted the player to leave the buggy behind, we had to be very explicit about it. Throughout Coast, players had been leaving the buggy and then returning to it, so we found that playtesters would try to bring it along if it looked even remotely possible. This small garage scene primarily exists to signal clearly that the player is done with driving and will be proceeding on foot.
Dropship deployment. Deploying soldiers from the dropships was tricky, as it required NPCs to spawn inside another solid object. To get them into the open where they could start navigating normally, they immediately play an animation that has them leaping out of the container the moment they spawn. Once that was working, we encountered another issue. Savvy players would simply just wait outside the container and shoot the soldiers during their exit animation. To counter this, we added a turret to the container to defend the soldiers as they exit. It doesn't fully prevent a player from taking advantage, especially if they're using an indirect weapon like a grenade or something, but that felt realistic and like a true-to-life countermeasure someone thinking strategically might take.
Get your car in the garage!
Okay, Doc. You'll have to go on foot from here. There's a secret path along the cliffside, but no one's going anywhere until we fight off this attack. Having you here to fight alongside us is going to make a big difference for morale. Oh, crap. Here come the dropships.
Lighthouse gunship. The gunship scenario here took some work to play out the way we envisioned it. We wanted it to unfold as it would in a movie. In the filmic version, a gunship would fire through the windows as the protagonist ascended the lighthouse, anticipating their movements. To simulate that anticipation in the game, we set up a complex series of trigger volumes along the staircase. As they detect the player moving up, they instruct the gunship to choose a new flight path that matches the player's altitude. The triggers also enable bullseye targets in the windows nearest the player. These are invisible game objects that the enemy AI will immediately perceive as hostile, and prompts the gunship to fire at the windows. This blend of AI and scripting is central to Half-Life's combat scenarios. The AI manages the general, adaptive behavior of the NPCs, while the scripting customizes each scenario's unique requirements.
This way, Dr. Freeman. We'll take the cliff path before another gunship finds us.
Major fracture detected. Automatic medical system engaged.
Right along there. And watch your step. I'm hurt.
Buggy theft. As we built the end of Coast, we decided to have the Combine steal the player's buggy. It really doesn't make logical sense, but after watching so many playtests where players developed a strong attachment to their buggy, we wanted to play with that emotional connection. Once we implemented the theft, we had playtesters yelling at the Combine for stealing their ride, something we took as a sign of success. The soldier firing down from the cliff top is simply there to draw the player's eye up, triggering the look target and spawning the dropship with the buggy. Watching it now 20 years later, we're struck by how ridiculous it all is.
Finest mind of his generation. Here is another small interstitial scene that ended up working well. The only requirement for this moment was to teach the player to stay off the sand. With prior scenes, we were still focused on simply making them functional. But by the time we got to this one, we were becoming more comfortable and started enjoying the process of putting extra thought into these moments. In doing so, we pushed the characters beyond being mere signposts, creating something more interesting and entertaining. After release, Laszlo went on to develop a larger-than-life following, reminding us how hard it is to predict what players will hold on to.
Not Laszlo. What's the point? I know you tried to help. I'll stay with him a while.
Floor is lava. Building gameplay around broadly understood concepts like the floor is lava made training it easy. We liked how our physics system allowed for a high degree of creative freedom in how players chose to tackle it. Some build walkways out of many objects, while others focus on using just their two favorite sheets of metal. Some carefully follow the path up in the rocks, concerned about falling, while others move directly towards the exit, perched on objects just above the sand. Playstyles varied. Some players consider it a failure if they summon antlions, reloading immediately, while others enjoy scrambling back up on the rocks to recover. We also like that it functioned as a navigation puzzle, but could be turned into an arena if players prefer. Some just jump onto the sand and fought their way to the end.
Sandtrap Thumper. The explosive barrels are provided for players to use against antlions while standing safely within the Thumper's protection. But we're also using this as a hint for the upcoming Antline Guard encounter, where players often use similar tactics to win the fight. Optional player actions like launching explosives with a gravity gun can be forgotten if they aren't used regularly. With a wide range of offensive options we give players, there's no guarantee they've used this ability recently. So here we're subtly suggesting that they bring it back into their toolkit before they face the guard.
Vortigaunt Extraction. This arena presented some tricky design problems for a couple reasons. First, the guard is a melee-only enemy, so we couldn't allow the player to reach areas where the guard couldn't follow. We did experiment with a few ranged attacks, but didn't like the result. Its goose-fitting attack, for instance, ended up looking ridiculous. The only non-melee attack that survived was its ability to bash physics objects at the player, but this required objects to be in range, which isn't always guaranteed. The second challenge was ensuring that no matter where the guard dies, the Vortigaunt can reach its corpse. This was essential as the game can't proceed if the Vortigaunt is unable to extract the bug bait.
In rare cases, players could find themselves unable to kill the antlion guard in this arena. This would happen if they ran out of ammo, or had misused all of the available physics objects, leaving nothing to launch with the gravity gun. To address this, we added a citizen on the mounted turret above the gate as a failsafe, allowing a stuck player to rely on a citizen to kill the guard.
The Freemen will do wise to heed our extraction of the Myrmidon's aromatic theropods. The process is not entirely hygienic, therefore stand aside. The Freemen will have need of these theropods on the path ahead. Gather them now. The Freeman must follow. The Freeman must excuse us. It is rude of us to commune by flux shifting in front of those whose vital inputs are in hand. Yes, we will vocalize in your auditory language as a matter of courtesy. Unless we wish to say unflattering things about you. Just so.
Get going, Dr. Freeman. Nova Prospect is just ahead.
The Freeman honors us by his presence. Follow Freeman.
Bug bait training. This clumsy bug bait training is where we landed, having run out of time, but needing players to understand the tool for Nova Prospect's design to work. Generally, we aim to add enough flavor and context to training so it doesn't feel like training. It feels like a natural part of discovering something new. Here, though, we didn't quite manage that. As obvious as it may seem, bug bait wasn't something players intuitively grasped. We're well into the game now, so players have plenty of experience dealing with enemies. Before we added any training, the first playtesters who collected bug bait entered the next level and instinctively shot the first antlion they saw, because that had been working up until then. Half-Life tends to encourage a shoot first, ask questions later approach. Similarly, when players reached Nova Prospect, they didn't think to throw bug bait at the Combine soldiers and instead relied on their usual weapons. So, we needed this training not only to show how bug bait works, but also to demonstrate that antlions would be close to the player without attacking.
Now, attend well. Apply pressure to your theropod to signal the antlions in your command to follow you. The Freeman shows his excellence in all things. And now this one must bid the Freeman forward. Nova Prospect lies just beyond. Remember well what you have learned here. The Land has greatest confidence in you.
Thumper Final Stage. We liked the final stage of Thumpers, where their purpose is inverted. Now, instead of serving as a tool for safety, they act as a blocker for the player's antlion army. However, we probably should have incorporated more thorough Thumper training before this point. While it was acceptable for players to only partially understand Thumpers in the earlier Coast levels, the stakes are higher now because players are also trying out bug bait for the first time. Players who don't realize that this first Thumper prevents their antlines from moving forward may misunderstand how bug bait works. If they throw bug bait at soldiers in the first bunker and no antlines arrive, they might conclude that bug bait is unreliable or doesn't work as expected and switch back to using their weapons instead.
Assault on Nova Prospect. With an infinitely respawning antlion army on a coastline assaulting a fortified Combine base, it was hard not to try a Normandy-inspired level. Our initial prototype featured trenches leading up to Nova Prospect, with lethal machine guns forcing the player and their antlions to stay within the trenches to survive. It was thrilling to have machine gun fire and leaping antlions constantly passing above the trenches. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it work within our performance budget, and ultimately had to set it aside in favor of a completely different layout. However, the mounted guns remained, as their lethality proved useful in encouraging players to rely on their antlions.
Nova Prospect stabilization report. Directive 2. Engage reserve. Contain exogen incursion.
Nova Prospect Yard. The combat throughout the Nova Prospect Yard was largely inspired by our early observations of antlions fighting Combine soldiers. The antlions' high mobility and melee attacks paired well with the soldiers' range lethality and vulnerability up close. Antlions look great under fire, with particle effects flying everywhere, and when they finally reach a soldier, the resulting ragdoll effect is incredibly satisfying.
Magic Wall. Like many of our combat arenas, we needed a gate of some kind to prevent players from moving on before they finished this fight. Unfortunately, we were out of time and had to move on to the train station, so we ended up with this bit of magical bullshit. A wall that just explodes after the second gunship is defeated, revealing the way forward. We reassured ourselves that most players wouldn't notice, as they'd be busy fighting the gunships, and our playtesting had shown that generally they all finished the fight before they reached this point. With enough explosions throughout the arena, the destroyed, burning wall felt pretty natural, so we threw in a couple of simple gas puzzles on the other side to justify it. But no, we're not exactly proud of it.